Weeks ago, we began a series of messages from Daniel. In the second week of our study, we studied the second chapter. In the second chapter, we saw a dream. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. He dreamed of this great statue. The head on the statue was gold, and we saw the interpretation said that that golden head of Nebuchadnezzar would stand for a while, but that would not stand forever. There would be a time when it would fall. Followed by a silver arms and chest, and that's where we are today. The rule of the Medes and the Persians. The time of Babylonian Empire is behind. The time of the Medes and Persians has begun. And as it begins, leadership changes. Anytime an empire changes, leadership changes, and the leadership change is significant. Darius comes to rule over the place where Nebuchadnezzar had ruled. And he chooses Daniel to stand at his side and to be the ruler over other administrators and governors and vice regents, because Daniel is a man of great character. Now, when we first started our study of Daniel, in Daniel chapter 1, Daniel was between 15, 17 years of age. Now he's between 80 and 88 years of age. My time flies when you're having fun. He has aged tremendously. And in his age or old age, he is seen as one of excellent speech and trustworthy, conscientious, strong character, and a man of ethical integrity. But no matter how clean and pure you are, there are those who will have to try to put you down. Leaders cannot keep people from talking about them, but they can live so that any charges leveled against them will be lies. When Paul wrote to the Philippians, he didn't simply write to the leaders, he wrote to all Christians, and he said, well, let's read it together. Become blameless and pure, children of God, without fault in a crooked and depraved generation, in which you shine like stars in the universe. God's people are to shine like stars against the velvety darkness of the world in which we live. Now, Daniel was surrounded by some petty politicians who were quite jealous. We don't have their name, and that's okay. They may have felt they earned the right to the position that Daniel was given. They certainly had problems with his being a, quote, foreigner. No matter how much integrity you have or how responsible you are, you will find that there are people who really would rather you not be that way. I don't have to walk far with businessmen to hear stories of people who would like for their bosses to compromise, or would like for those around them to compromise on what needs to be done. Now, as they studied Daniel, they studied him seeking to find a weakness in Daniel. People are always studying us. They really do. And one of the things I've discovered is not a one of us is really as bad as the people who don't like us thinks he is, or as good as the people who do like us think we are. We're a mixture. We have a little good and a little bad in us, that's for sure. Daniel is defined as without corruption. He is defined as one with no negligence. He is defined as a man of integrity and trustworthiness. They study him and they say, we cannot attack Daniel on anything but his relationship with his God. He is very consistent in that relationship with his God. Something that has to do with the law of God will be the only way we can cause his downfall. If those around you wanted to cause your downfall, would they be able to say that? What would they say about your character? Daniel's faith literally put a bullseye on his chest, or his back, if you please. He was a target. And Daniel's character teaches us something. It teaches us that doing right is no guarantee that everything is going to go right. Sometimes you do right and wrong happens to you. Now in verse 7, we read about these people around Daniel. In verse 7, it says the royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors. Well, you might say the governors, the regents, the commissioners, the way the structure of the whole area was put together, all of the leadership have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the edict. Anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now that's the edict, the story, or the key thing that rides on this story, that guides us through this story. But let us pause for a moment to see if we can understand a couple of things in that. First of all were not consulted. There would be several hundred of these people in different places, and obviously they were not consulted. Obviously Daniel wasn't consulted. Then we have the crazy thing of anyone who makes a petition or prayer to any person or to any god. That's a rather interesting way of saying anyone that asks anything of anyone or anything will be thrown into the lion's den. Now you saw in chapter 3 that the Zoroastrians were practicing a different way of life and way of punishment than those who had gone before them. They did not burn people by fire because they felt fire was holy. So they used a lion's den. That's why you have fire in chapter 3, and years later you have a lion's den as a source of punishment in chapter 6. So there's a difference there that's a cultural difference, a change that takes place. Darius the king was probably appointed by Cyrus. Darius the king was a man in his early 60s. He was a man who changed the way government was. In Nebuchadnezzar's day, he was an autocratic leader. In Darius's day, he used a sort of participatory governing style, inviting other people to participate in the government. But he was a good man, but he was vain. He was proud. He thought this was a good idea. Now, he didn't stop to think, what would it be like if everybody brought all their petitions to me? This is not a group of 10 bringing petitions. This is everybody in the land. You bring the petitions. The idea of any leader wanting everyone to bring every decision to him is a little bit preposterous. It stretches the imagination. The idea that you can be God for a month stretches the imagination. If you can be God for a month, why can't you be for the lifetime? But they say for 30 days. He didn't catch either one of those things. He just said, this is a good idea. I like the recognition. I haven't ever had it before. I'm going to enjoy it now. And so he stepped into a trap. Immediately upon the presentation of the decree, you have an incredible teaching verse in the Bible. It is verse 10. In verse 10, we read, "Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God just as he'd done before. I want to pause on this verse. I want to see how the story hinges on this verse. When Daniel heard the decree had been published, when he heard about this, what's he going to do? Is he going to say, I'm better for the Lord's work if I'm alive than if I'm dead? Is he going to say, I haven't compromised all these years, but a little compromise here, that'll buy me a few years, it'll be okay? He doesn't say that. He has a much greater depth about him. You see, as Daniel faced this decree, this edict, this law, Daniel didn't face it as a choice to make. He faced it as a challenge to his faith. When we face challenges to our faith, our commitment to God guides what happens. Daniel was willing to die in obedience to God rather than to live in disobedience. We read on. When he heard this decree, he went to his upstairs room, where his character and commitment was refined. In the upstairs room, the windows are open toward Jerusalem. They're open to the west, so he can pray toward the city of God, so he can pray toward where the temple once was. Now, it's in that prayer position or place that he set the direction of his life. Question: where do you set the direction of your life? Let's see. I got up 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late. Can I make it on time to work? I'll grab something to eat as I head out. I can fix my makeup on the bus. And off we are. So many times in life, we kind of roll with the way the schedule goes. But Daniel said, wait a minute, my life is too valuable to roll with the way the schedule goes. I need to set the direction for my life with God before rolling time comes. There is a huge difference in the depth of the degree of a person's commitment to God when they take time to set the direction of their lives or when they wander into wherever it is. Daniel took time to say, wait a minute, I must set the direction of my life. Now, he gave us an example of praying toward Jerusalem, but later on, Jesus will tell the woman at the well in John chapter 4 that you don't have to pray on this mountain or toward that mountain or that city. A time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem, he said. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. So, the time comes when we choose to worship God. It's not so important which direction the window faces. What's important is which direction our heart is set. Now, I want to submit to you a thesis. I want to submit to you that the lion's den for Daniel was at the window where he prayed. It was in his prayer that he wrestled with the power of anxiety and fear, the power of pressure, the power of others' opinions, the power of his own weakness. My friend, if you wait until you smell the breath of the lions and hear the growl of the lions, you've waited too long to pray. your heart is set in God's direction long before you get to the lion's den. Long before. And Daniel gives us a beautiful picture of that. It says 3 times a day he knelt to pray. Now, in the Psalms, the psalmist says, evening, morning, at noon, I cry out in distress, and he hears my voice. And we have evidence of many people in different times praying 3 times a day. But the people in captivity, in Babylonian captivity, would not be able to offer their sacrifices. So they often use the morning time of sacrifice, the evening time of sacrifice, as prayer times. Time to make what we would call the sacrifice of prayer. Daniel uses this guide at these different times so that he can open his heart to God. He gets on his knees. His posture is on his knees. The Bible tells us, on his knees he prayed. What's the posture of your spirit when you pray? Now, in the Old Testament, we don't have any problem reading of those who stood while they prayed and those who knelt while they prayed. And one is not condemned and the other praised. They're both acceptable. The kneeling prayer is a prayer of humility. It is a prayer seeking God's direction. He prays just as he has done before. He doesn't go running in and say, oh, now it's time I need to pray. No, he prays out of the flow of his life. It comes out of the flow, not out of the crisis. Huge difference there. Now, prayer for Daniel wasn't incidental. It was a part of the essential practice of his everyday. Why? Because Daniel had a big view of God. His view of God wasn't a view that said, oh, God can't help in this crisis. What are we going to do with the doctor's diagnosis? What are we going to do with the family crisis? What are we going to do with the job loss? What are we going to do? I don't know. Wasn't where it was. Bigger than those experiences, and those are huge, was his view of God. God was over all. And so when we look at Daniel and we listen to Daniel, Daniel is submitting everything to God. He's not one that has a genie for a God. He doesn't have a philosophy that God is, do me a favor, God. He has a belief that God is an awesome God. Now let me tell you what it is when you have that concept. When God is bigger than anything and everything, God, largeness, diminishes the size of your ego. I need that because my ego, my pride, my feelings, my vanity causes me more trouble than anything else in my life. There's not another person that causes me more trouble than I cause me. There's not another pressure that causes more crisis than I cause in my life. And I need that time with God that makes me see that I'm not God. And I'm not in charge or in control. And that He is sovereign. He alone is sovereign. And regardless of what takes place, He's in charge. I have to see that. And I have to come to the place where in the prayer, my faith is allowed to stretch so that I can see that He can do that which is beyond my imagination, that which is beyond my thoughts, that which is outside of my predictions, that which is not discolored by my limitations. And the only place that can be done is in prayer, where God knocks down the walls I erect. But as He enlarges the faith, you know what else He does? He embraces me in His identity. Oh, I walk in a world where my identity is thrown at me in so many different ways. It's thrown at me with family, it's thrown at me with job, it's thrown at me with where I live, it's thrown at me where I've educated, it's thrown at me with what's in my bank account or what's not in my bank account, it's thrown at me in my ethnic background, it's thrown at me in my national heritage, it's thrown at me in many different ways. But that's not my identity. My identity is based in my relationship with the living God. For you take all that away, and He's still Lord. He's still God. And so my identity's there. And as I walk with Him, He's able to stretch my heart. I don't know about you, but I have a shrinking heart disease. I wish I could get a shrinking stomach disease. But I have a shrinking heart disease. And sometimes Dr. Seuss finds it several sizes too small. Well, Daniel built his reactions on what he learned from God. Listen to me. He didn't have all the chapters of the Bible that we have. We have New Testament. He didn't have New Testament. He didn't even have all the chapters of the Old Testament that we have. But I'll tell you what he did have. He did have the ability to take what he understood and apply it to his life. When you're facing crisis, don't be afraid to say, is there a commandment I need to follow? For Daniel in this, it was Exodus chapter 20, verse 3. Read it with me. You shall have no other gods before me. Very clear. Not another god, not another idol, nothing else before God. That's a commandment to follow. Helps with the decision. But sometimes we don't have a commandment. We look for a principle. If I wanted to take the commandment and find the principle, I would say, is there a principle to follow? And yes, there is. You shall only have one God. It's not the God of the day, it's not the God of the week, it's not the God of the sea, or the God of the sky, or the God of the trees, or the God of the plants, or the God of having babies, or the God of getting married. It's not one of those gods. It is one God. He is one God, one alone. Sometimes we have a commandment that can guide us. Sometimes it's the spirit of the law, the principle that guides us. But we have a third question. Is there an action to take? What action do you take? Daniel's action was to do exactly what he'd done before. To maintain his relationship with the living God and continue to walk in that standard way, that straight way, that clear way. And that's exactly what he chose to do. He went just as he'd done before. The accusers stood back. They watched him. And then they raced off to the king. And they went to tell the king what they had seen. And what they told the king was that, well, they really asked him a question. Did you make a law? Yeah, I made a law. Ah, that exile, not that leader, that exile, Daniel. He's violated your law. He's not loyal to you. He does not follow you. And in a moment, in an instant, the king knew he'd been played for a fool. He spent the rest of the day trying to find a way to keep Daniel out of the lion's den. He was probably appointed by somebody, so he didn't rule over the law. And as such, he cast Daniel into the lion's den with a prayer. As Daniel is cast into the lion's den, he prays, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." The Bible tells us that he goes home. He has nothing to eat. He doesn't accept any music. Ladies, he's not going to let you play the violin. He's not going to let you play the piano. He's not going to let you play any wind instruments. You're done. You're off tonight. He doesn't let any of these things take place. He's melancholy, fretful, and upset. First ray of dawn the next morning, he heads out to the lion's den as fast as he can, and he cries out, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions?" You'll notice that he uses the term servant of the living God, as if he recognizes that the gods he serves are not living. Serve of the living God. Daniel answers back, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They've not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." I want you to notice the words, "my God," for they are key. Daniel's confidence was placed in a relationship where he said, "My God, my God." I want to ask you this question. Does your walk with God allow you to say with confidence, "I take this stand with my God"? Have you so set the direction of your life that you're able to say, "I take this stand with my God"? The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not lack. My God. Daniel rises out of a relationship with a living God. The king is overjoyed. Daniel is freed. The accusers are condemned to death. The king praises the living God. And we walk away from a story we hear again and again. But we remember that God does not promise all of us the kind of deliverance we long for. In fact, He doesn't promise the same kind of deliverance in every situation. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah noted that when they were called Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in chapter 3. And they had to say to the king, "If God delivers us, so be it. If God doesn't deliver us, so be it." We're okay with that. And that's where Daniel is in this chapter. We're promised we can trust God through our crisis. Pray with me. Father, some of us have come to this place today and we stumbled because we've allowed the opinions of others to be our gods. We've stumbled because we have felt, we've said you're God, but we've acted like we're God. We've stumbled because we've tried to include you with all the other gods in our lives. But your word teaches us that there are not many ways up the mountain. And there's only one God who came down to us and who met us in our weakness, who paid the price for our sin in His death. but conquered the power of sin in his resurrection and offers to walk with us through life today. Not just setting the direction for us, but giving us confidence and courage as we face sunshine and rain. Father, today, as we come to the Lord's Supper, we ask you to help us renew our commitment to you and our willingness to stand with you in quietness and in the midst of all things that life throws at us. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.